Okay, everybody, welcome to the May 2023 InterReach webinar. We are so excited for today's session, and thanks everyone for joining us. So the title of today's webinar is Facilitating Interdisciplinary Research Through Vertically Integrated Teams. And I'm super excited to briefly introduce our two speakers. First, we have Ed Balleisen, who is a history professor or a professor of history and public policy and the Vice Provost for Interdisciplinary Studies at Duke University. He oversees 10 university-wide interdisciplinary units and also the Basque Connections program, which we'll hear about a lot today. Ed holds a PhD from Yale University and a BA from Princeton University, and he also answers emails from somebody who he's never met before that just asks, can you go to lunch because I want to figure out if I can do an interdisciplinary career, and then becomes their mentor sometimes. So I'm very grateful to Ed for his intellectual generosity over the years, and excited to hear from him, and equally excited to hear from Laura Howes, MBA, who is the director of the Basque Connections program at Duke University. In this role, she works across the university to manage program design, implementation, financing, evaluation, everything from start to the finish, at every level of detail, and is so flexible and helpful. So she holds an MBA from the University of Maryland and a BA from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And we are really excited to hear what they would like to do with our community today. So I'll pass it off at this point. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Christine. Wonder if, just as we get going, if those of you who joined us today could just zap a quick overview or introduction of yourself into the chat. It just would help us to know where people are from and what your backgrounds are. Just that would be great, and we'll just scan that as we go. Christine, can we, or Laura, do you have can
Yep.
you have the slides? So what we're going to do today is aim for about 30 minutes of presentation, and then hopefully discussion, conversation. Should say as well that if you have a question as we move along, please feel free to indicate that. And maybe Christine, if you could try and keep track of whether somebody's got a hand up or has put a question in the chat. I'll be looking for that too. I know Laura will, but if you could help with that, that would be awesome. So Duke has invested a lot of resources in interdisciplinary research and education, as well as community engagement over the last quarter century. That part of that is all of the interdisciplinary units that investing in those units that Christine alluded to. We also have had my job for 20 years at Duke, which is really unusual. Just now in the last year and a half, a number of other universities are starting to create vice provost positions that focus particularly on integrating interdisciplinary research and education across schools or colleges at a given university. One key development in our strategy has been the development of the Basque Connections program 10 years ago. And you can see on this slide the key attributes of the program. The origin of it was a challenge from a donor to the provost at that time of a substantial gift if the university could come forward with a new program that would have the potential to transform higher education, a small goal. And out of that came a set of ideas that emerged into Basque Connections. So the idea here is to pull together faculty from multiple schools with graduate and professional students, often community organizations or other external entities beyond the university, around some very significant problem, challenge, and to do that in a way that allows students to get an authentic research experience. We've worked hard over the last 10 years to refine this model, and we're going to try and give you a sense of some of the key features to it and a flavor for how it works in in the time that we have today. Next slide. So why do we go down this path? Well, I think this is I don't think this is going to be a new argument to this group, but climate change, racial and social equity, the issues posed by information technology and artificial intelligence. These are not partisanship and polarization, not just in the United States, but in countries across the world at the moment. These are really hard problems. They do not fall into disciplinary buckets. They require teamwork. And if universities are going to not just make progress in understanding these problems, but also think about how to address them in a constructive way, they can't also do this in a university silo, even if they're connecting people within the university. They have to do this in partnership with individuals outside of academia. So we just have to have experimentation around how to build these more cohesive and ambitious teams. Another key rationale for moving in this direction from our perspective is just recognizing what's necessary to be effective as someone in the workforce in the mid-21st century. So we just here is just a reminder, I don't think any of this is going to be news to this either, that what employers are looking for are the capacity to work collaboratively, to demonstrate inclusive leadership, which means managing up and as well as down and sideways, to be able to pull together complementary expertise into a group that is creative and that can pivot when the inevitable problems emerge with any kind of research endeavor. All of this is the kind of thing that you can get with participation on an interdisciplinary research team. And we've seen this with our students, their ability to explain their skills, to discern their passions, and to communicate that effectively to potential employers has been really remarkable over the last 10 years. So just a bit of an overview of the kinds of things that have emerged out of this program. The core of it involve year-long interdisciplinary research teams. A little bit smaller scale this year, 55 teams are, I think the most we had in any year was 70. You can see the number of people involved, so we've achieved a significant scale here. I'll note that while this is the core of the program, we have a number of complementary pieces. So we have some summer programs that have the same basic model, interdisciplinary problems, team-based approach. But there, the teams tend to be exclusively undergraduates with a graduate student mentor. And these occur in some particular channels like data problems, data analysis, or public-facing humanities research. We have a program in the summer called Story Plus, another one called Data Plus. And here it functions a little bit more like an internship from the perspective of the student. Key piece here is that every one of those teams has, in essence, a client. Sometimes those clients are within the university, sometimes outside. We've also been fostering a set of courses that are just semester long, in part because we can't meet the student demand for these interdisciplinary experiences, but in part because we just see this as a model that's, we believe, a really powerful element of education at all levels in the 21st century. So we've been developing mechanisms for interested faculty to develop structures and strategies for building collaborative project work into semester-long courses. And the most important of those is a faculty fellows program. We could talk about that if anyone's interested in greater detail. We also have some more modest investments in allowing students to continue work on a given team with a more independent project as well. Next slide. So this gives you some sense of how the program has grown over the 10 years. Again, a little bit slight dip in the participation and the number of teams for the most recent year. That we're going back up for 23-24. And you can see as well that this really does involve broad participation from across the university community. The faculty and staff number is predominantly faculty, but I don't want to minimize the staff component. We have a lot of PhD holding staff and master's holding staff at Duke, and they often are playing absolutely essential roles on these research teams.
So just to provide some sense of, Ed mentioned that we have external partners and we anchor the focus of interdisciplinary research around societal issues. We do that through 6 interdisciplinary themes, but these are very broad themes. So we look pretty open-minded about what might fit within those themes, but it's a way of signaling to the community, the societal relevance of the research that we are seeking. So these themes are each housed in one of those interdisciplinary institutes that we mentioned in the beginning, so part of the broader interdisciplinary infrastructure at Duke. We do regularly look at the themes to make sure they're still relevant to, the types of questions that we think faculty and students are really interested in digging into. So about a year ago, we had a theme called Education Human Development that we sunset and introduced our new Race and Society theme. We also just launched a new theme on health policy and innovation. So these themes are, here to stay for a period of years, but we're kind of always looking at how to reconfigure them based on new and emerging questions and issues. In the middle, we also mentioned this thing called Vast Connections Open. So we do accept proposals for project ideas that fall outside of these themes that are still aligned with our model of vertical integration, interdisciplinarity, and connection to some societal issue. So to give you all a sense of how these teams work, and then we're going to dig into more specifically the focus on vertical integration, which is our chosen focus for today. So these are for our year-long research teams, which are often the kind of core of the program, although as Ed mentioned, we do have other program elements. So what are these teams and how do they actually work? As Ed said, every year we have between kind of 50 and 75 of these teams running at a time. Faculty propose ideas for projects to us. We have a broader leadership team that we work with that consists of faculty and staff in those interdisciplinary institutes that reviews proposals, sends them out to other faculty for review, and is really looking through the lens of that program model that we introduced in the beginning. So is it interdisciplinary? Does it have good vision for how to vertically integrate this project, including graduate and undergraduate students, really working in partnership with faculty? If we see a proposal that reads a little bit like, I want 6 undergraduate students to be doing RA work for me in a way that's not really integrated or keeping in the spirit of the program, that's typically a project we would not fund. And then we're also looking for that societal relevance angle. So faculty propose projects to us. That, as Ed mentions, also includes a number of staff. We also allow graduate students, PhD students to propose projects to us as long as there is a faculty leader attached. So we've seen some really nice projects emerge that are core to a graduate student's dissertation work or other research, but heavily supported by a faculty co-leader. Faculty, our teams are we have a pretty flexible structure. So most teams include at least 2 team leaders. Sometimes, on the higher end, maybe 4 to 5 team leaders is probably the highest we've seen in terms of true engagement. We let faculty kind of conceive of how they want to structure the leadership of the project. With the interdisciplinarity, we are looking for projects that include faculty and staff from different units, but we have certainly had projects where the faculty leaders might come from the same unit. If you take a school like public policy, there's some inherently interdisciplinary intersections in, between, you could have an economist and a psychologist working together. But we've also had faculty leaders who are really from the same discipline, but they're asking an interdisciplinary question. They're seeking to engage students from different fields and disciplines. To give one example of that, we had an English professor a couple of years ago, 2 English faculty members, and they were looking to engage students in doing some data mining work. So they themselves were learning a new skill set by integrating students with computer science skills in a unique way.
Hey, Laura, there's a question in the chat
Yeah.
about faculty incentives. Great question.
Yeah, good
It
question.
really varies. So for some faculty, and there are many of this type in our School of Medicine, especially on the clinical side, the program is a wonderful way to launch a new stream of research. You get 10 to 15 undergrads, grad professional students engaged in a new idea, and they can provide help in developing pilot data. So it enables that type of faculty member, and we've seen this work really nicely where there's a relatively new faculty member being mentored by a much more senior person, enables that younger faculty member to become competitive in external grant competitions. This is often also really attractive to people who are committed to community engaged research. So that's an incentive. We have a budget that we offer. Most teams are like the average amount of teams, the average budget for a team is about $20,000. That can help with field work or lab supplies, depending on the type of project. And then in some cases, it's faculty just want to try a new way to teach. And so there are a lot of intrinsic reasons for faculty to do this. I will say that at the moment, the actual teaching credit for participating on a team, because it's so connected to faculty research interests, is really patchy, and it depends on local decision-making in departments and schools. Most faculty don't get any teaching credit for doing one of these teams, and that is a headwind that's a real disincentive for some faculty. Laura, any other thoughts about that?
No, and we'll, in a few slides here, give a few concrete examples of how these projects work, which I think will amplify this different ways in which faculty have leveraged the program. So student participation, again, our teams are highly variable. On average, our average team size is about 10 students now. On the smaller end would be 5 to 6 students. On the larger end, we've had teams that are upwards of almost 25. If you have, those large teams do require a lot more thought and intentionality around how to really structure them to make sure that all students are engaged. But we've seen it work. Ed himself has led a team that has about 20 students. So we've seen this model work pretty variably. We've even, in our evaluation work, done some analysis to say, does team size impact student engagement or satisfaction on teams? And really haven't found any evidence of that. So when done right, we've seen those large teams can work quite nicely. Students do receive academic credit for participating. As Ed just implied, faculty often do not receive teaching credit. So it is a hybrid research education model. Students, some of our teams do have a summer component where students might receive compensation in the summer, but during the academic year, most students receive credit. The exception to that would be advanced graduate students who are playing this important graduate student kind of mentor, project manager, interlocutor role that we'll dig into a little bit more today.
Laura, another question in the chat, which maybe you could talk about a bit, which has to do with the selection process.
Yes.
Rebecca Loeb is curious about what criteria is used to determine societal relevance.
Yeah, good question. So to take the selection question first, so once we receive proposals from faculty, do our screening process, pick the projects we're going to fund, we have a kind of central application process we run every spring where students can apply. Students can apply for up to 3 of these projects at a time. But we always tell students, this is a year-long experience, so you should make sure you are passionate about the topic. Only apply to the teams that you're really interested in. So we have many students who only apply to 1 project, some will apply to 2, and then some will also apply to 3. From there, the faculty leaders screen applications and make decisions. So part of the application, when faculty propose projects to us, we ask them, what types of skill sets and experiences are you looking for in students? That said, we ask faculty also be open-minded. We have a lot of rising sophomores who apply to the program. So people with limited research experience, and we ask our teams to be open-minded about welcoming students with less experience on their teams as well. And I think that's generally very true of the program. but so we ask them, what types of interests and rough backgrounds are you looking for? And then students, when they apply, should be making the case how they might fit into that team. So each team is looking for a unique mix of skills and students and experiences. So we do leave it up to the faculty to decide how to piece that together. Societal relevance. So I would say that really, if you looked at our teams, you would see a continuum. We definitely, in our Brain and Society theme, have a couple of projects that are would hew more closely to a traditional science research project. We've had a project running for multiple years doing research on Alzheimer's. That includes a faculty member in radiation and another one in psychology and neuroscience. But it is, probably less interdisciplinary and less applied than some of our other projects for sure. On the far end, we have projects that are heavily engaged with multiple community partners doing locally grounded research on a daily basis. So we look broadly to say, is this research that has translation potential and engages in an issue of importance to society broadly. We do ask in the proposal process, do you have a community partner attached? It's not a requirement, but that's something that we do like to see because it's a signal towards that application element, but also we found it to be projects with that embedded community partner can add an extra element for students, giving them experience really developing relationships outside of just the university is important for their own development as well. Anything to add, Ed?
No, I think that's great. There's an additional question about from Kevin Bonine, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, about noting that at Arizona they're using the VIP consortium model.
Yes.
And that a key element there is a goal of multiple years rather than just one. And he's correctly pointing out the value of near peer mentoring and student growth when students do stick with a team, not just for 2 semesters, but maybe 4 or 6. Yeah. And maybe I thought you might want to just reflect on that, since Duke is not part of the VIP consortium, but we definitely, as Kevin notes, have a lot of overlap in objectives and practice.
Yes. Kevin, you're jumping ahead in our slides. We'll let you deliver that slide, but it's a great point. We actually have Georgia Tech VIP towards the end as a great model of, our program vertical integration is core, but a vertically integrated project program model is very closely aligned with what Vast Connections does as well. And we've learned from speaking with them as well. So for those who aren't familiar, there is a program called the VIP program, the Vertically Integrated Projects Program. Georgia Tech, I think, has the largest VIP program, but there's a consortium that's run out of Georgia Tech to kind of spread and scale this model throughout higher ed. So they have a range of partner institutions as well. And on their website, they have 7 or 8 core elements of what makes a VIP something that fits in their model. And I would say our Vast Connections program, although we didn't even know about VIP when we developed this program, probably meets 7 out of 8 of them. A key difference between Vast Connections and at least how Georgia Tech runs their VIP program. One, we do provide project funding, as Ed mentioned. So our project teams receive funding of about $20,000. At Georgia Tech, at least their VIP program provides administrative support, but no core funding. But the second element is exactly to Kevin's point. They set up those projects as 3 to 5 year endeavors from the onset. Our program provides funding 1 year at a time, although we do have project teams that run across multiple years. So every year, about half of our project teams are a continuation from a prior year. And that does have really important benefits to this vertical integration element in particular. So we've seen, undergraduate students who might start on a project as a sophomore. Many students will just do this for 1 year and then move on, but some students will join as a sophomore and might stay on the same team for 3 years, or they might even move between teams in an area of interest. But in doing so, they're taking on higher levels of responsibility and research on teams, mentoring new students joining the project. And then, of course, graduate students are playing a really important mentorship role. So where you see some continuity, it can really amplify this layered mentoring model, which we found really useful to faculty, but also graduate students, giving them that opportunity to do mentorship and project management. So yes, really, really good point. So just to touch on a few more features of this slide, we talk about this program or our project teams as being year-long. Again, we let faculty decide what a year is. So for some of our teams, they run during the academic year and don't, have sustained engagement over the summer, or during the summer, you might have 1 or 2 students doing some additional RA work, but the intensity of it happens mostly during the academic year. Some of our projects do include robust summer research. So it's really up to the team leaders to decide how they want to structure the summer, whether they want to build in budget for student support during the summer. We, especially in our global health theme, but also increasingly in our energy and environment theme, we have many teams that are doing international field research. That type of work really can only fit in most of the time during the summer. So that's where many teams tend to pick up some summer work as well. And then our team structure, as we mentioned, this program's pretty flexible. The model is variable. For those larger teams in particular, many of our teams use kind of a sub-team model, and we provide faculty, brainstorming guidance on how they might think about using sub-teams, but it's really up to them how to structure them. So we've seen, projects that might divide sub-teams. If you're looking at a research question across different geographical areas, you could have sub-teams assigned to different geographies, many sub-teams aligned around kind of functional research questions based on their skill sets. And then we have some teams where they're really working in an intact integrated model regularly. And then we have increasingly been encouraging our teams to use project managers. I would say at this point, almost all of our teams have a project manager. Sometimes that might be also the faculty or staff leader, but it's generally a graduate student, sometimes a postdoc, or occasionally one of those advanced undergraduate students who's been on a team for multiple years. But the majority of our project managers are graduate students, postdocs, and that's something we have found to be really important to the success of our teams, and have been really honing that point over the last 5 years, to the point where almost everyone coming into the program understands that that's an important element of how to make these teams work well. Just to give a quick sense of the range of things that our teams produce. So again, here it's an interdisciplinary program. We do not predetermine or require any type of specific outputs. We leave it to the teams to decide what a meaningful outcome is. When faculty propose projects to us, they do say, we think we're going to create an exhibit, or we think we're going to do a series of oral histories. We also leave flexibility and space where if they start doing their research and realize that doesn't make sense, or students have a different idea, we want to allow that creative space. So we often tell our teams that, if the research question, hits a dead end, that's fine. What we want to make sure that we're doing is supporting, the kind of this team science element, making sure we're setting our teams up for success in terms of how they're engaging and going about doing the research. But it's really up to them to determine what a successful research output is. So we've had, a pretty huge range of different outputs created by teams, just a sample of those here.
One comment on the way the program has functioned. You saw in that previous slide grant submissions, and one way the program functions, not for all teams, but for many, is essentially as a seed grant, with the idea being that you get into the position where you can then be competitive for external funding. So we've had with respect to the grants that we know about and for which faculty have explicitly said to us, no way would I have been able to get this grant without the Bass Connections team as a precursor. The return has been close to 6 to 1 in terms of what we've invested and then what has come back to the university in the way of grants. So we thought we'd give you at least a few concrete examples of teams. This first one, the issue here that has motivated the research is the the global problem of cervical cancer, which continues to afflict to afflict about 500,000 women a year across the globe, and that results in more than 270,000 deaths every year. Most of these cases occur in low-income countries that can't afford tools of diagnosis that are commonly used in the United States or Europe, or the wealthier parts of the rest of the world. In this case, the faculty member in our engineering school invested quite a lot of time in developing some technological responses to this problem. And that mostly happened in the context of her own research. But she realized if this was going to have an impact in the world, it required a lot of additional work, regulatory approvals, analysis of supply chains, training of healthcare providers in cultural context, integration of this technological tool with other modes of screening and filtering out potential patients who then might be selected for a higher level of screening. Well, what did that kind of work require? It required business expertise, people from the law school, political science and policy, cultural anthropology. Students from all of those backgrounds and faculty as well ended up participating over multiple years and with really quite important outcomes and fieldwork in a number of different countries. Next slide, Laura. Second example, gerrymandering has become a huge issue in the United States over the last 10, 15 years. We had a professor in our math department get very interested in this issue, especially since so much of the legal analysis turned on the inability to have some type of objective quantitative measure of gerrymandering. So he got to work with students on thinking about that problem and how one might respond to it. That's led to a tremendous amount of interdisciplinary work between math, statistics, and political science, but also in conversation with a host of NGOs concerned about the state of American democracy and the development of not only technical analysis, but the translation of that analysis into engagement with the broader public, and quite a lot of work that ended up in amicus briefs that became quite significant in a number of court cases at both the state and the federal level. And then a final example, I noted in the chat that every so often now we get an idea for a team that's really driven by undergraduates, and this is one of them. So we had an undergrad who was doing an interdisciplinary self-created major around global health and community engagement. And this individual started out on a team that was looking at the problem of disability policy in emerging economies. And at the end of that year's work, this student really thought there needed to be a pivot towards analysis on a similar vein with respect to issues in Durham. And he convinced the faculty leads to allow him to explore that a little bit. And that turned out developing into an entirely new team that talked to local healthcare practitioners, identified a really significant local need, which involved the challenges many local health clinics faced with patients from marginalized communities, especially those without English as a first language, in getting access to social services indicated as a result of their healthcare visit. And what emerged out of that was the development of a landscape analysis of how healthcare clinics across the country were responding to this type of problem, the different models that had emerged, what might work best in the Durham context, especially with Duke University as a backbone for engagement, and the creation of what is now called Help Desk. And this is now morphed into a completely extracurricular student activity in which students are trained in how to engage with patients after their visits. It's grown now to 3 local clinics. and is providing a very important service in the Durham community.
So those are some of the project outputs, just to provide how we are looking at impact more holistically. These are some of the kind of hypotheses and evidence that we've been collecting around the program over the last 10 years or so. We've touched a little bit on the faculty output piece already. What we have here on the far left of the diagram is more immediate things all the way to longer term output. So we did a couple years ago do a survey of faculty who participated in the program in the first 5 years, a couple years out, looking to see, sustained engagement, and found a range of things, including, really deep sustained relationships with students even after they graduated, some faculty integrating new kind of approaches to project-based collaborative learning into their classroom, and then just kind of new research trajectories that these projects can spin off. For students, we've seen, that the program can mean many things, and for every student, it might be a little bit different. But for students, it's, finding mentors, whether that's undergraduate to graduate students or graduate students and faculty mentors, building those teamwork and research skills that Ed mentioned in the very beginning, but also can play a really important role in kind of clarifying their interests and their pathways. That might mean realizing, actually, I don't want to do this kind of research, or, finding something that really sparks their interest and, informs what they do after Duke, whether that's further research or further education or, their job choices. We've had many students do theses or dissertation work related to their projects. And, now that we are 10 years in, we have a growing base of alumni, and we've done our first alumni survey. Right now, we're actually doing some focus groups with alumni to hear more about how it's informed their career choices, but see a lot of evidence for that. So a few things that we always tell our teams just in terms of how to make these teams work, because they can be quite complicated. So they're interdisciplinary, they're cross levels. For some of our faculty, they have not had experience leading projects of this nature. So we do an orientation every year with our teams. These are some of the things that we always highlight for them. So one is just foundation setting, making sure you're really setting clear sense of vision around the project from the beginning, giving students a sense of the background research, but kind of getting them up to speed quickly, especially for our teams that might only be running for a year initially. It's really important to kind of set kind of that strong foundational element. That also includes some, research mechanics, like get your IRB done as soon as possible. These second and third ones are probably the most consistent. When we see projects that do not go as well as they could, it is because there is a lack of clear goals, roles, expectations. This is probably not a surprise to many of you, but we are consistently hammering this point with our teams. We do have guidance and tools that we suggest. So we have a project charter template that we encourage our teams to use. We talk about setting team norms and rules. But, every year there's a team or two that when we collect assessment and evaluation data, we hear, well, it was great, but I wish I'd had a clearer sense of what I could contribute or what my role was, or, those types of things can really impede progress on the project, obviously, but also hurt student engagement. The fourth is regularly scheduled, well-organized meetings. I come from a project management background where I've always heard, standing meetings can be the death of you. Do not set up standing meetings, meet only as needed. I would say that the exception is certainly here. Students are incredibly busy, as are faculty. So to keep progress on these initiatives, all of our teams are required to meet weekly. And just making sure that those are, productive meetings. So rather than report out, we encourage our teams to really use them to dig into issues. If there's sub teams, this is a really important piece of making sure that it's clear to each sub team how their work is intersecting and supporting one another, because we've seen these sub teams work really well, but we've also seen that they can create some challenges with communication. The fifth, because we do have team leaders that might come from different disciplines and fields, it's important for those team leaders before they even get started to be clear on how they're envisioning the project, how they're going to work together. Some of our faculty leaders know each other quite well, and sometimes it's a new partnership. The sixth, which is one of the points we want to dig into with our remaining time, is this layered mentoring model. So again, we found this to be quite critical. We'll provide some examples of that in a second. And then just providing students the opportunity to reflect and present on their work is a really important element of helping students make sense of what they're learning and gaining through an experience like this. Ed?
Yep. So as Laura's mentioned, there's a lot of variety in how our teams work. We have teams that are as small as 6 or 7 students, and I think the biggest has maybe been 25 or so, something along those lines. I've been involved with some of the bigger teams in the sort of 20 range. It just really matters, though, that while you can do this a lot of different ways, having some approach to layered mentoring is just crucial. One of the ways a team can go sideways is if more experienced students don't have a sense that their expertise is being tapped. So if you're treating, when we have teams where the graduate or professional students feel like they're just in there with the undergraduates, it doesn't go so well. And by contrast, when the team is well organized, whether that's a sub-team format or not, and where especially there are opportunities for the students to demonstrate their expertise and to be leading on something where the faculty are learning, that just works so well. I've had students myself take me through different dimensions or aspects of data analysis that I think have been incredibly beneficial for me. And you can just see the confidence level in the students when they realize they're basically giving me a tutorial. I'm expecting the same thing this summer. I'm going to have a small group of students in our Story Plus program doing podcasts out of oral history interviews. I've never done a podcast. They're going to be taking me through it. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think. And you'll see this in a minute. We've got some comments that we're going to show you from our student participants. The grad students really, really benefit from a more complex leadership role where they're having to manage up, sideways, and down. Just give you some sense of how that process works here. I'm not going to read these, just give you a sense of, let you read these comments to give you a little bit more of a detailed sense of how this works for individuals. And here are a couple of other comments. I'll say just a word about this. In one of our summer programs, our Data Plus program typically has 25 to now as many as 35 teams running, along with an allied program that we call Code Plus. So these are all teams of 3 or 4 working on a group project with a graduate student mentor. They're all co-located in the same building. And they just do a tremendous amount of cross-training and near-peer mentoring in these teams. So separate from the graduate student mentor assigned to a particular team, the undergrads are mentoring one another in this incredibly powerful way because they're all bringing different experiences and expertise to the table. So that's just a fantastic thing to see every summer.
So just to dig a little bit more into the impact for graduate students, when we've surveyed our graduate students to ask about kind of what this is we let them pick top 3 outputs or top 3 things that they feel like they improved upon as a result of participating in the program. What you see at the top are these, management skills really that are broadly transferable across fields. Fourth down, certainly expertise in a research area. Research skills are all part of there, but you could argue most graduate programs are already filling that niche. So for graduate students who get to play this important interlocutor role, we've seen evidence that it can really help develop these project management and communication skills, which are hard to build in other settings. Just one small example of a graduate student testimonial, noting that they plan to engage in interdisciplinary research in the future. So this opportunity to practice those skills in a team-based setting is really important and something that's hard to find in many graduate programs. So just a few things that we do to kind of foster this intentionality around teamwork and vertical integration. These links are on our website and we can pop them in chat in a second. We have a team resource center. As I mentioned, we have things like our team charter there, team ground rules, resources to really help teams think intentionally about how to structure these teams. We also have a separate section on project management, which is targeted at our graduate student project managers. We run a short course in the summer for graduate students in our program, but also other graduate students at Duke who are interested in, fundamentals of project management, where we touch on many of these things. We also have a mentorship award that we do every year to recognize our graduate students and our postdocs. And we always hear really just the most amazing stories from this call that we do that really affirms the importance of this model. And then we mentioned the orientation. We also do a pulse survey in the fall now, where we provide an opportunity for people to say what's working, what's not working on our teams. And we share that feedback with the project leaders so that they have time to course correct, rather than waiting to the end of the year and hearing, oh wait, I wish I'd had a clearer sense of what my role is. We're trying to help teams identify those problems as early as possible. And then vertical integration. This is I mentioned we had Georgia Tech VIP in here as well. Lessons that we've learned, as Ed mentioned, having a differentiated role for these students, graduate students, professional students, is really important. They're looking for those concrete applicable skills and really don't want to be treated like any other undergraduate student. So having this layered mentoring model provides a nice way for graduate students to play that differentiated role and develop skills that are meaningful for them, and also benefit undergraduate students. So it's a win-win for everyone. The one thing we have found is that it's really important, in the beginning we talked about have a project manager for your team, but what we found is that maybe not everyone understands what that might look like or how to use that person. And graduate students might say, yeah, sure, that sounds great, I'll do that, without really understanding the boundaries of what they were doing versus what faculty were doing. So that led to instances where graduate students were feeling overwhelmed, or maybe sometimes underwhelmed, because they weren't clear how they were supposed to be contributing to the project. So again, underscoring the point, clear roles is really important here as well. We have on our website for teams now a sample job description for project managers. We encourage them to have a very intentional conversation about what they're actually asking of graduate students who are playing this important role on our teams. As I mentioned, we also provide training and point our project managers to different resources that exist as well. And then, as we mentioned with the Georgia Tech program, we have found that multi-year projects, although we do not require them, can be really important for this vertical integration model and helping develop those additional layered mentoring models.
So we thought we'd open up time just for discussion and conversation. You've already in the chat, Kevin particularly engaged with the first question. We'd be more than happy to hear other ideas about how to structure multi-level teams effectively. And particularly as well, if people had experience which suggests, and this gets at another question that that Christine just posed, how you build team culture that really has a democratic ethos to it, or while still maintaining a sense of structure and allowing faculty to steer where they need to.
I'm going to stop sharing slides so that we can have a conversation and see each other better. Before we do that, last slide I just want to mention, so we will be hosting a journal discussion on May 23rd. Hope you can join us. So the question we would love to hear additional thoughts on is how to develop consistent methods to assess the impact of this type of work across higher ed. We've taken our own stab at it. So two of the readings we have here, one is kind of a lit review showing how other people have done that, but underscoring that there's really no consistent, rigorous approach. And then a second is a draft manuscript we have showing how we've assessed it, but we're really interested in thinking, there's the Georgia Tech VIP model. Like how, as we look across the landscape, how would we actually develop consistent methods and approaches to assessing the impact of these vertically integrated interdisciplinary teams? So hope you can join us for that, but I'll stop sharing now and we'll open it up for discussions. Maybe I'll stop sharing. Okay, so a question about the academic year structure. So for our teams, so we do have a long lead time for this model. So faculty will propose projects to us in the fall. That's usually a November deadline. We select projects by December. Students apply in February so that they know if they've been selected for a project by the time they're registering for the next academic year. So that's usually in March, or they register in early April. So it's almost a year planning lead time essentially. And then projects can start that summer if they have integrated field work, or they'll start in August and then run through April or May. Once we get to April or May, teams will often tack on, oh, we still have some data work we want to do. A couple students want to continue working with us this summer. They might have, some subset continue with RA work, or as we mentioned, put in for another year and then continue in that manner.
I have a question. Anybody who wants can jump in front of me. I don't want it to be me mostly, but my question is, I noticed that in a lot of integrative scaffolding work, sometimes there is a difficulty getting people to buy into what they see as maybe extra. So I'm just curious, your experiences and methods of helping people understand that doing team charters, doing this like explicit role expectation stuff. Do you have people that think that that is just too much extra work and you have to impress on them that actually this is going to save you time and pain, or how do you deal with it?
Absolutely. I would note as well, there's just a very common first year trajectory or first time trajectory. And this is true for a year-long team. It's also true for people who decide to try and go this route in a semester-long class. So referring here to the collaborative project courses, in those cohorts that we've had now, 2 of them where people are developing courses along those lines, the common challenge, the most common problem is the desire to pack too much in. So you're going to layer on top a project of what's already a full course. That does not work well. So there's a subtraction element to this as well. That's often really important. I would also say the first year trajectory is one of learning. Everybody goes through the same or similar kinds of bumps around those issues. It's so crucial to build social bonds on the team. If you don't do any kind of social events, people don't get to know each other. And then it's really harder. It's more likely that you're going to have miscommunication, especially when people are working across different levels of expertise and different kinds of epistemologies. So it really matters to get to know people. So then when there is miscommunication, you can fix it relatively quickly, and as opposed to having it then fester or lead to social sort of interpersonal tensions. There is also undeniably, I think, a smoother process when it's a continuing team, because there's just way more likelihood that it's going to take 4 to 6 months to find your footing when you're doing a really complex interdisciplinary project with a lot of assumptions that turn out not to be accurate about research avenues that actually are not feasible or not feasible at this time, or data that's not available, or a lot of other problems that are just common to any research, but particularly so with interdisciplinary community engaged research. And the pandemic required people to pivot in the most unbelievable way, because all of people, pretty much everybody's research plan got blown up. The interesting thing is that people pivoted so well, in part because I think of the structure of decision-making that allowed for creativity and for, multiple perspectives on that. So,
yeah, Ed mentioned the year we had the largest number of teams was actually during 2020, 2021. And that was because we had a special call we did around projects related to COVID research. What I think was interesting, COVID hurt many of our teams, but it also, I think, provided students a unique opportunity to engage when they needed it a lot. So these are small groups. They were meeting over Zoom that year, but different than a Zoom class. And I think helped students maintain some important connections at that time. Just to address the other question, so the program is open to all undergraduate students and all graduate students at Duke. So in some ways it's a unique, especially for graduate students in a professional program, they might go to the business school and never leave the business school. This provides a way for them to engage with the whole of the university. For undergraduate students to work with faculty in law or medicine, really gives them kind of a broader footprint. It is selective though, so not all students. Every year we're at about 30% of students who applied this year did not get placed on a team. Again, those are often, you have a better chance of getting selected if you're a senior or a junior. So we tell students, if you didn't get in your first year, try again. And I think most students do get placed. It also varies by topic. So if we have a project on like AI in health, at Duke at least, those types of projects get a lot of applications. Whereas some of our more niche topics might get a smaller number. So it just kind of varies the selectivity based on the topic. Yeah, question?
Yeah, no, thanks very much for answering mine as well. Sorry, I was hiding and behind my camera. So I'm at the University of Birmingham in the UK, and we're trying to set something like this up. We have been for a while, actually. So I suppose my question is, going back to when this first started, obviously you said that you have a rather generous endowment, which kind of like helped launch this, but what were the teething issues and kind of lessons learned from that I should probably be aware of?
Well, Christine's question points out a lot of it. For faculty who haven't done this before, there's going to be a learning curve in terms of what you have to jettison over the side of the boat, in order to really make it project focused. At the same time, there's likely to be some kind of level up that needs to happen at the beginning, especially if you're pulling in students that are at different levels, which is an enormous strength of the program, actually, I think. So getting that balance right is hard. Getting people to connect to external partners in some cases, if that's a key element of what you want to achieve, can be complicated. We have at the master's level, the professional level, an even larger number of programs, in terms of students engaged, who are doing essentially group-based client-inflected projects. So this would be engineering management, environmental management, our law students, our masters of business administration students. They're all doing this kind of thing, and sourcing the projects is complicated. And so there's a lot of investment of time that needs to happen there if you want to make that a crucial dimension of what you're doing. Those are a few thoughts. Laura's also mentioning, Ilya, that we have a symposium in June that may be of interest to you, and it's really designed for people who either want to start a program or want to scale one, or want to think about how to do a program like this, or that's already going on more effectively. We've got roughly 100 people coming from 40 different institutions. Still a few slots left. I think we're at time, Christine, but I'm wondering if any of the alums of the program on the call want to chip in anything that we've missed. Ashton and Kim, anybody want to chime in?
I'll say I can keep this open. So thanks for those who have to leave. Thank you so much. And for those who'd like to continue the discussion, yes, please chime in.
Go ahead, Ashton.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw a different raised hands. I didn't know if that was a buy or a raising hand. Oh, this was for Ilya, but he's gone. So point. Yeah, I feel like the faculty were always the hurdle with best teams, because the students were like ready to do whatever the faculty wanted them to do. And it was just a matter of the faculty understanding that the students were not going to be like expert research assistants from the get-go, that were going to do the work that they wanted to get done on their sabbatical for them. and that maybe the output was not going to be a peer-reviewed article or, you know, the perfect thing that would contribute to their research. It might be some intermediate thing. That was always a challenge I had to deal with as the grad student on the team, who was sort of between the faculty and the students. This was helpful. I feel like my knowledge of Best Connections is a couple years out of date, so this was a nice update.
Well, good to see you, Ashton. Kim, were you gonna say something, Kim?
I was going to say it's interesting because I think I almost also saw the opposite in terms of like, I saw more of that from students because I think we were a little bit on a more of an alternative project. Like our output was more data visualization and like education materials. And I think almost students were a little bit less excited about that because that holds a little bit less, for better or for lack.
I'm probably wearing a little bit of rose-colored glasses for the students, because it was another challenge I was going to ask about is like the whole question of like how to get the students to be engaged, because it seems like paying them didn't work, class credit didn't work, like they were always going to be overcommitted Duke students. And yeah, so
It is certainly true that students can be overcommitted. I mean, at the same time, we've seen some students really embrace things and go above and beyond. So I think sometimes it's the student, sometimes it's their schedule. Since we do offer academic credit, we consistently tell students they do not need to overload to do the program. It can be part of a core load. But for whatever reason, there is a tendency for students to think, oh, I'll do this as an overload. And then they become overloaded.
I think that's just a Duke tendency to overload, period.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always going to be variability. If I think about the team I most recently co-led, which worked over 3 years, and there were maybe close to 60 students. Well, actually, probably closer to 50 students, because every year of the last 2, there were people who continued. What we've just described as variety, you can see it in the team itself. So there were some students who didn't ever really fully engage because they were overcommitted. There were students who got a very good experience out of it. And there were students who got a spectacular experience out of it. And partly that was about their initiative and what else was going on in their lives. Partly it was about the serendipity of the fit for their role on the team.
Joanne. I'm
gonna have to jump in just a second, but Joanne, you have a question.
Yeah. And
Well, now I have a comment. You know, I've been following this stuff for how many years now? And what finally got to me today was students you're talking about most likely have to take a team class in psychology, sociology, or communication or management. And I'm writing here in the 6th edition of our group communication book. And I don't think we're addressing the topic with students early enough. And I was really taking notes today because we need to find a way to have a synchronicity of some type between what they're learning in their gen ed classes versus what they need to do for you. And that's very different. And so I don't know how I will make this shift or add a chapter. I don't know what I'll do, but I promise you I'll address this in the next edition of the group communication book. And it's thousands of students take it. And whether they go on to your kind of work or to work in an organization, it really doesn't matter. But I think you're trying to do one thing with the students, and I think the social scientists are trying to do another. It's just the content of what we tell people to do is very different. And how they practice it in class is very different.
One quick thought about this. One great thing at Duke that's emerged in our engineering school, the very first class every student takes now is a design class.
Mm-hmm.
They're in a group of 5, they have a design challenge, they have a client.
Yep.
And so what that does is it makes them practice group communication from the very first semester at Duke. And it's hard for them, and they learn amazing things out of it.
Yeah, I think I need to work on the social science side of it, because I think that the classes that are being offered for them to learn those skills, at least on they're too soft. They're not rigid enough. They're not, here's the framework you need to use. And I think scholars push back against that because there's many different group frameworks to use. Not all groups work like your group, student groups do. But I would guess that more than half of them work that way. So just hit a note with me today and I'll see what I can do. That's all I can offer.
That's great. Thanks. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for hosting us, Christine. Good to see you guys.
Yeah,
Thanks so much, Laura.
Bye.
Good to see you.
thanks, everybody.